welcome back once again to another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes. I am your host, and today we are going to do something a little bit different than the norm. A couple weeks ago, I got an email from Becky Simpf, who is the acting senior curator at the Center for Creative Photography in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, if you're not familiar with the Center for Creative Photography, it is a wonderful institution. It was co-founded, it's part of the University of Arizona, but it was co-founded with Ansel Adams in the mid-70s, and they currently house not only one of the largest Ansel Adams collections of photographs and prints, but also other photographers such as Edward Weston and many others. And anyway, I got this very humbling email from Becky, and she had been watching the podcast and noticed that we were doing a lot of black and white technique and said, do you have anything that you've done on burning and dodging and darkroom techniques? And I thought, well, Becky, you've got me at a very good time, because in the last couple episodes we have been covering a lot of these black and white techniques. We've covered zone system a little bit, and we went on to a little foray into digital photography and conversion techniques to black and white. And I thought this is the perfect time to do something that would cover enlargers, burning, dodging, etc. The Center for Creative Photography is actually hosting an exhibition that opens in April, and they're looking for a video that would go on a loop in the gallery. And I told her I would be thrilled and honored and humbled to be asked to do this, and she took me up on it, and we decided to do it. So anyway, what I'm going to do today is just kind of roll the tape. You guys can see what we're working on and what's going to show in the galleries. And so anyway, what we're doing here is enlargers and darkroom techniques, specifically burning and dodging. You know, when I've shot digital and done computer manipulation for post-processing on images, the convenience of it is wonderful. The perfection, the finite control you have over things, the ability to correct mistakes, to tone down errors. But for me, I've never felt like it's an image that I owned. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but there's something about doing something with your hands, and you've made it. It's one of the things that really, it's not instant. It's not learn this in a day or learn it in a class. It's drawing upon years of experiences, from your own as a photographer. And I think that's what, the people that I admire and that I look up to, I think that's one of the things that really separates them out from the rest of the crowd and makes the greats greats, is that they understood this, and that sense of pre-visualization, knowing their possibilities, knowing their limitations, and being able to work within that and produce beautiful art. There's nothing else like it. This is the enlarger that I use in my darkroom, and I'm going to kind of go through this part by part and show you what everything does on here. It's really pretty simple when you kind of break it down. You could think of it sort of like a camera, but I like to think of it more as a projector, which is exactly what it is. Basically, from the top to the bottom here, up on the top you've got a light source, and there are varying flavors in this, but basically all this does is emit light into a series of bellows here, and these can be expanded or contracted depending on what size negative you have in there. In the middle, I'll go ahead and open this up, you have a carriage in here. This is called the negative carrier, which is basically kind of a sandwiched piece of metal here that you can see there's a roll of film in here. My picture is showing through. When you want to change your negative, I simply just open this up, and we're able to switch that out. So below this, what you have is the lens board, and actually what happens is light travels through the bellows, through the negative, and actually hits the lens. You are able to focus this, and the lens, I actually have 3 different size lenses on here, depending on what size negative I've got in there. Under the lens, what I have is a filter holder, and I use a system made by a company called Ilford called Multigrade, and Multigrade papers allow you to use these filters, and they come in a box of about 12 of these in varying grades. And what they allow you to do is actually control the contrast, and the paper interacts with these filters really well. And so, for instance, the higher the number, this is a number 3, the higher the number I have, the more contrast I'll have. The lower the number, the less contrast I have. So if you have a negative that's shot poorly or something that you're trying to rescue, you can actually tone down the contrast to bring back some detail. But this works really well. I really like the system. And this all projects light down onto what is called the baseboard, and the baseboard really is just a piece of board that everything is bolted down to, and your print actually goes in an easel on this board, and you're able to make your prints that way. The only other thing is there's this really large frame that goes around it, and I do have, this is electronic, this specific model, not all are, but this allows me to electronically raise or lower to vary the size of my enlargement. So for instance, if I'm going to print on a really large sheet of paper, I would probably raise that up and get a really large projection. Works just like a projector. Whereas today we're going to be shooting, or actually we're going to be printing to 8x10 paper, and so we don't need it to be that high up. It's fairly small, but you're able to vary that height depending on what kind of paper you're printing on.
So typically the first thing you do in the darkroom is you make what's called a test print, and we're looking at 2 test strips right here. And these are made by taking a black sheet of cardboard. You go ahead and turn on the light and you start exposing. And what you're going to do is actually cover these, and I did these in 5-second intervals, and you basically every 5 seconds you move the sheet of cardboard over, and I did 4 on here. And you realize that the darkest one is the one that gets the most exposure once this print is developed in the chemicals. And so down here you see the darkest elements near the bottom. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit lighter, and a little bit lighter up here because this one is exposed 5 seconds longer than the others. I noticed that this one really wasn't dark enough. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get the base exposure. So we're not talking about burning or dodging yet. We're talking about just getting an exposure for the print. So where our starting point is. So I did this one on the left, and this one was actually done the opposite direction, but you can still see that it was actually done in 5-second intervals. And I determined that this middle one, or this darkest one being 40 seconds at this aperture, 35 seconds, and then 30 seconds is this middle one. This middle one is the one I wanted to go ahead and capture. So you can see this is what I've determined as my base exposure. So just by moving that sheet of black cardboard over in 5-second intervals gives you the differences, you know, between those timed intervals. You can also see that what you start to notice in these is if you get a sense for burning and dodging. If I were to burn this 5 seconds longer, I would get this darker shade, which does start to bring in a little bit of detail in the stem of this pear here. And what we're going to see in a minute is after we've developed it and got a good base exposure, when we go back to do the burning and dodging, you can see that the burning, what the effect is going to have on that, and the dodging over here. A lot of photographers like to work, you know, maybe ripping this sheet of paper, cutting it into thirds so that they can conserve paper. With a print like this, it's really important to be able to see the whole thing. In fact, you might even want to do another one that's side to side just so you can tell the difference. That's very important in determining what your exposure is going to be. So after you've determined your basic exposure time, you basically put a sheet of paper on the baseboard and turn on the enlarger, and you're going to time the print. What I usually apply is what we've talked about as burning and dodging. You can see I'm burning here, where I just use my hands to make small holes of light. Dodging is the opposite, where you use your hand to cover part of the exposure to keep it from being lit. And these techniques can give you more exposure for burning or less exposure for dodging. And, you know, really, this is what, you know, Ansel Adams referred to as, you know, the performance part of the print, because it would never be exactly the same twice. And I think that's really kind of the magic that happens here. Even though you kind of write down your exposure times and you say I want plus 10 seconds of burning or I want minus 10 seconds of dodging, and this affects the overall exposure. When you're done, you simply slip the print into the developer chemical, and you can see that I'm moving the tray, and this is a technique called agitation, and it's just making sure that the developer stays moving and, you know, it's spreading evenly across the paper. After about 30 seconds, you can see the chemicals reacting, and you can see the print start to develop in the tray. And, you know, obviously this is a particularly interesting moment when a magical moment when you're first starting out, and honestly I don't think you ever lose that. I think this is still kind of the most exciting part of printing, when you finally see a print come to life. Typically you leave it in the developer anywhere from about, depending on how strong the developer is, a minute and a half or so, and you basically you know, have a print at that point. So with each print that I make, I will make small adjustments to see what's kind of going on. And these are more or less, this one on the right here is a straight print, so there was no burning or dodging involved with this. It's okay. The issues are I wanted the image to go back just a little further and be a black around here. And I also wanted to bring out just a little bit more of this table down here because it's really hard to see with the exposure kind of fading off like that. So the next print that I made, I actually went a little bit longer on the outside, maybe by about 5 or 10 seconds. And what I did is I actually did a 10-second dodge down here. So I used my hands on this under the enlarger. And when the timer got to the last 10 seconds, I simply covered this up. And you can see me doing it when I show the burning and dodging, but basically you just kind of want to get some motion in there so it's not a hard shadow line when you're done. You don't want it to be obvious what the burning and dodging has done. In fact, masking that, making it look natural is the entire technique with that. And as you can see, here's another take with that. Just bringing out this slightly more. And another thing I did is I just about a 5-second burn up the middle where you actually just create a hole with your hands. And I wanted to start putting a little bit of detail back in the pear. And it wasn't quite enough, so I actually went back and did a full 10-second, actually it's maybe a little more than that, 10 to 12-second burn in the pear. So now that what we can see is this is an example of both burning and dodging. The full exposure basically gets the background black. The last 10 seconds of a dodge lightens up the bottom, gets a little more of this table out, and then I went back through, set the timer for another 10 seconds, and burned in the pear. And you know, it may be a little dark for my taste. I actually think this is probably the best one, because one of the things I like about this pear is that it does have almost a light bulb quality to it, which, you know, takes it away from the reality a little bit and creates a sense of the surreal. So as a photographer, I think this is the one that I like the best. But this experimentation, and you know, we went through about 5 prints here. So a lot of times, you know, you kind of have this notion that an artist goes into the darkroom and just creates magic all in one take. But the reality is I did 2 test strips and then 5 prints to arrive at this conclusion. So that was 7 sheets of paper there, which is normal. Sometimes you'll do more. At this point, if I feel good about this, probably what I will do is write down exactly what I did. I write down the length of the master exposure, and then I write down, you know, minus 10 seconds or minus 20 seconds for dodging, or plus 10 or plus 20 for burning. And I'll mark those areas on here. That way, I usually sit on these a day. That way I can come back, kind of make sure it's really what I want, look at these subjectively when I'm not, you know, in the heat of the moment, and go back and actually recreate this in a series of prints. And that's more or less how a print is made, and that's how burning and dodging works.